where in his seat of freedom rests, tipped up says Joyce in Ulysses, where Shaw saw nature shine so kind. Rostrevor stirs the poet's mind. So welcome all, you're welcome all, to write a verse or sing a song. You're welcome all. I'm very, very happy to welcome all of you to this very special programme about the Rostrevor Literary Festival. And we've got Jane Kelly up here. We'll be speaking to Jane after a while, and Billy Graham. Billy, a writer himself, journalist for many years. We're here in a very special place. These thrones belong to the Narnia exhibition because C.S. Lewis was here quite a bit. And the good thing about these thrones is there is a good social distance between us. So we're keeping safe and sound. Billy.
Thank you, Tom.
Great to have you, and it's great work you're doing. I know you're the driving force behind the festival. How did you first get the idea?
Well, I suppose about 6 years ago I had a dream, and when I woke up from that, it was a dream to have a literary festival. Something probably I wanted to do for a few years. So then we sat down with other people, like one of the key organisers, Jane Kelly from Rostrevor, and the Hungarian poet Csilla Toldi, who lives in the village. And we tried to put together a programme. It was very encouraging because we brought some very interesting people together, including 3 former Burritt hostages, Brian Keenan, Terry Anderson, John McCarthy. First time since they'd been chained together in Burritt that they'd shared a public stage together, and the atmosphere was electric in listening to their stories.
I don't really know what growing up in East Belfast prepares you for, but I suppose Ian Paisley lived up the road, and Van Morrison lived a wee bit down from and I lived a wee bit down from Van Morrison. So I begun at the bottom of the ladder in terms of all that. But East Belfast was kind of, I suppose, like most ghettos in the city in the 70s, that kind of Protestant Bible Belt enclave was something that made me uncomfortable. I wasn't well suited to it. And I always had this inclination to travel. In my working career, I ended up working as a kind of community development officer for East Belfast, and then later up the Shankill. And there's a kind of sense in my mid-30s that the city that I grew up on was going nowhere. You know, I had come to a point of stasis, which I suppose mirrored something in myself, you know, that I didn't seem to be going anywhere. So I decided to run away to better climes. And I remember standing at the bus stop getting into town to buy a couple of shirts for my trip to Beirut. And a friend of mine who lived at the top of our street on the Beersbridge Road said to me, "Where are you going, Brian?" I said, "I'm going into town to buy a couple of shirts." He said, "Well, what do you need the shirts for?" I said, "I'm going to Beirut." And he looked at me. "Beirut? Couple of f***ing body bags you need?" So that was my preparation for Beirut.
Well, you had 3 good shirts anyway.
In your case, circumstances were pretty different. Prep school, good secondary school, Haileybury. It all sounds very comfortable and very contented, with presumably no hint that you would ever find yourself in the kind of territory that you did, even before you were kidnapped.
No, exactly. I grew up in Middle England, in the home counties. A privileged background, absolutely right. And my parents worked very hard to send my brother and I to public school, Haileybury, as you mentioned. And subsequently, when I came home many years later, my dad said, well, glad we sent you to public school, it must have prepared you for what you've just been through. Which kind of, in a way, it sort of had and hadn't. I think perhaps going to a school like that, which wasn't, to be honest, a very good one, it probably cost my parents too much money, one got used to just doing not exactly what one was told, but rebelling quietly. So life hadn't prepared me for suddenly being thrown into the very deep end of captivity and being terrified. And certainly not the early months of solitary confinement before I met up with himself. But I think, luckily, that what had prepared me in something that I went in with, which was of enormous value to me, was going from a very loving, caring family, parents and with just one brother. And I think that solid foundation was something that probably buoyed me up as much as the fellow three other guys I was with during those years.
You mentioned that you actually were somewhat of a nervous lad in your before you got to your teens at any rate, and that your brother was very good to you, that he used to read to you, and he used to read adventure stories for you to calm you down.
Terence was a lovely man. Sadly, he died a good few years ago now. But he wouldn't, even when he went off to this boarding school before me, and he was a nervous chap in his own way. But his love was such that he would continue writing these stories to keep me going. And perhaps subsequently I sort of became more confident in the world, perhaps because of wider experiences and such like. But that caring bond was always there, and it was something that I could reflect on, particularly in the darker times of captivity, that was there. And a sense of humour that we all shared within the family is important.
Well, that caring bond that you talk about, it continued very much between yourself and the other hostages. But I would love to hear how you actually, the circumstances and where you were when you actually first met the two of you, from your own perspectives.
Should I go first?
Yeah, oh, okay.
Where were you at the time?
We were somewhere, I think, in the southern suburbs. I don't really know. And we were both held in isolation. He was somewhere. I'd heard him arriving. The cells were underground, I think. And I heard this awfully proper English accent. And I said, shit, I got an Englishman there. But I didn't see him then it all went dark and silent again. And I don't know how long after. I was taken out of the cell and thrown into the back of this. It was a Volkswagen van, because I knew by the engine it was a Volkswagen.
Were you blindfolded?
Yeah, it was always blindfolded. And there was somebody else was thrown into the back, and then a third person, and everybody was quiet because this was the first big move we'd had. Didn't know what was going to happen, so, and obviously didn't know who anybody was. And then I felt this hand tapping my foot, but nobody spoke, and I thought, well, that's a captive, obviously. So that was the first kind of communication, his hand tapping my feet. And then we were thrown into this room. We were taken out of the van blindfolded, and door open and thrust into this room. And then the door closed, and I stood there, the blindfold on, wondering what's going on. Because you didn't dare take it off. And then the door opened again. And your man was bundled in. I didn't know who he was. And then there was silence. And I remember standing, and I said, somebody else in this room, don't know who it is. I'm not taking this thing off because I'm going to get the lights kicked out of me, so I'm not. And then I started to raise my blindfold up, and I saw these pair of feet on the floor, and my eye following up the line of the trousers, and this awfully smart blazer. You want to carry on?
It's the scene that we've been at that point, I think, a couple of months in captivity, and been in isolation, as Brian says, in this horrible underground little prison. And one of them, there was a daily routine that each day the guards would come once every 24 hours, and you'd be taken blindfolded to this disgusting little bathroom at the end of the hall, and then back, and there'd be some bread and cheese and a jug of water left in your little tiny cell, and that would be it for 24 hours. That was sort of the basic routine. But then after a while, there was a young prisoner was brought in, an Arab, probably presumably a Lebanese guy, we don't know. And every day part of the routine became that this guy was beaten up, and you would hear him being thump, 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 and his screams. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. This ghastly addition to our daily routine. And after a few days of this, after the usual bathroom run, if you like, a whole group of guards came down to just see them sitting in the back of your cell through a little grill on the top of the door, the shadows of these men walking past. And they only went to this young man's cell, and then they started beating up on him. You could hear it, his screams got to an almighty pitch, and then there was a bang, a shot. And then that was that. And you realised that they murdered this guy. And I think probably because Brian was witnessing this wherever he was down that corridor, that sense of total vulnerability really sort of completely overwhelms you when you look back on your life. And I think we've been through this extraordinary process of looking at our lives, and probably it was the same for Terry in those circumstances where you just look back and think, my life's been a waste, however good it's been, however lucky I've been, I should have done more with life, and this could be the end of it. So then all you want is perspective, someone to talk to. And I remember thinking, brilliant, there's somebody in this room doing just as Brian does, and he wasn't wearing a smart jacket, what you expect. And there it was, but there was this, all I wanted was company for 3 months, and I'm looking at this thing, which has hair out here, beard out here, well, the man is staring in his eyes, and I'm backing up to the door thinking, fuck, it was better in solitary. But then we, obviously had a lot to, and then I recognised him. I probably went all British again. Oh, how's you, Brian Keenan, John Go. But then and I think I said something rude as well, but Brian might remember that. But what was funny was because we desperately wanted to talk. So we started talking, and of course, as we did, we hadn't spoken anyway for months. And we've been through a lot. And so of course our voices went up, and every time our voices went up, the guards would hammer on the door. Silence, silence. We'd have to start whispering. But I couldn't understand a word he was saying. But after a while I thought, right, I said, look, I don't want to be rude, Brian. Is there any way you could sound a little less like Jerry Adams or Ian Paisley? And this sort of mad glint came back into his eyes, and I thought he was going to hit me one. And he said, all right. If you stop talking like Prince Bloody Charles.
Billy, is Rostrevor a good place to hold a literary festival, do you think?
Yeah, not only is it a good place, it's the right place.
Yes.
Because it's an area of County Down that previously did not have this kind of festival, so it was something new to introduce. We also have a number of well-known writers here and musicians, so art is within the soil, within the lifeblood of the people in this whole area. And of course Rostrevor geographically sits here between north and south. In fact, it sits on the artificial sea border.
Yes.
Between north and south. And so we decided to have this festival, but it's not only artists from Rostrevor and participants, but also draw from poets, writers from across the island. Our audience is drawn from a wide, diverse range. People from Derry, Londonderry, people from Cork, people from Dublin, people from Port Stewart come here, and they taste literature.
Some people would say that a literary festival is for the elite.
I think some festivals, maybe, yes, are for the elite, but this festival is certainly not of that kind or nature. We have a very diverse range of people. In fact, free entrance to the festival, so nobody is left out, unable to afford to come to listen to literature and art. So we play, I think, a part in literature because literature opens minds.
Yes.
It also opens doors, and literature is not only about looking outside your front door, and you can see much further outside the door, your front door. You can see the world in literature.
She wrote this book, which is her debut crime novel. And what I would really like to know, how you got to this, from poetry to fiction. What was the journey like?
It was financially driven. No, not at all. I've been, I guess, telling stories all my writing life. I grew up in a family of certainly storytellers from my mother's point of view. Lots of wonderful stories about her life in East Galway growing up. Ballinasloe, County Galway, I don't know if anybody knows it here. But, you know, when you were living in a little suburb of South Dublin with Pebble Dash and very little to characterise it, these stories about wild children running amok in East Galway just sort of kept my attention. But she talked about her father, my grandfather Michael McCann, and the first stories I'd hear would be about, you know, his time in the Irish Civil War, because he was in the Free State Army. And so there was a famous love story involving Grandad and my grandmother. She was walking out with somebody on the other side of the conflict, the irregulars, we would call them, on the Free State side. I'm nailing my colours to the mast immediately here. So she was walking out with somebody from the other side. There was a bit of a gunfight in a pub in Kiltimagh in 1922. Somebody was shot dead. My grandmother's boyfriend went on the run. And my grandfather, who was the local commandant, refused to search her house, even though he was fairly sure that there might be incriminating evidence like a photograph or something, but he wouldn't. And risked, you know, all sorts of sanctions himself for doing that. But 4 years later, they got married. Had 10 children, including my mother. So that was the first story I heard, and I wrote poetry about that. So as I'm doing more research and finding out materials in the archives, I'm beginning to realise that there is, you know, Ireland in the early 20s, particularly in the period after the Civil War ended, was an utterly lawless place. 30,000 Irishmen who had been in the National Army for the Civil War were just let go. No jobs to go back to, no pensions, nothing. The other side of the conflict, the irregulars, hadn't really given up. It's kind of like, there's an analogy with the Japanese after World War II, I think. They were in the long grass with their guns. So there were a lot of bank raids, arson, reprisals, and it really struck me that that would be a fascinating period for crime fiction.
Where did you get, you make the period sound a bit like the Wild West.
Yes, absolutely.
And like you say, you don't read much about this when you're reading about Irish history. Where did you, how did you get this information?
I was reading local newspaper reports, and there would be accounts of bank raids or somebody having an explosion in their backyard, which turned out to be a stockpile of arms, or somebody driving by and firing a shot into somebody's house. And all of this was happening in Ballinasloe. And I just thought, that's really where I got the insight of it was a lawless time. It did feel like the Wild West. And in fact, Joe Costello, my desk sergeant, has a great love of Zane Grey novels, which he quotes quite a bit. So I was definitely feeling this was Dodge City as much as Ballinasloe when I was writing it. But you know, the local newspapers are just full of these stories of utter lawlessness.
Have you ever been to the Ballinasloe horse fair?
Talking of lawlessness, funnily enough, my mother never brought us, and my mother would talk, and she's 90 now, and her memory for that period is extraordinary, and she'd talk about it a lot. But presumably because of the things that she saw, she'd never let us near it.
Just tell us the anecdote about the people, the reaction of Ballinasloe.
I haven't been to Ballinasloe since the book came out. One aunt has already asked, could I have not made the people of Ballinasloe nicer? And somebody else who had given a copy of it to an in-law who lives in Ballinasloe reported something similar. So I suspect I may not be getting back to Ballinasloe anytime soon. But oddly enough, you don't tend to get happy, clappy people in crime novels. It's not really part of the genre. So I might write a romance sometime based in Ballinasloe. Who knows?
We want to have a little look at one particular poet, Frank Ormsby, who takes another view of things, and it allows us to think differently.
Yes, well, of course, the festival you're talking about was in 2018, and we were very glad to have it funded by European Peace 4, administered by Newry Mourne and Down Council. Not only did they fund the festival, they funded workshops, creative writing workshops, a visit to the Seamus Heaney Home Centre in Balachi, and a special tour of ancient sites along the border. Now that, yeah, you mentioned Frank Ormsby. We were very glad to have Frank for man, a great teacher in Belfast all his life, a man who now has his health challenges with Parkinson's and diabetes. And so, in Frank's own words, he wants to get things done now. Yeah, it's better to do things now than later on.
Yes.
So we're glad to have him. He gave a great presentation, and some of his work is very challenging. Some of the words are very challenging, but also talking about illness or sickness, he was able to, in his address and talk and question and answers, was able to tap into some of those challenges and explanations, but also very interestingly use humour in talking about Parkinson's, which many people don't find very funny, but the audience were rolling in the aisles.
Altar boy economics. A wedding paid better than a funeral. We were tipped for smiling and looking cute in photos. Though sometimes a funeral paid better, the mourners at a loss and wanting to be thought generous. Wedding tips could be displayed with a discreet jingle, but funeral tips were almost secrets hoarded for rainy days. A christening did not require an altar boy. Christenings were, economically speaking, a dead loss. I wrote a series of poems about having Parkinson's disease, which I do, though that's my tremor hand there, and I can certainly carry a pint of Guinness from one end of the room to the other without spilling a drop. The first thing I did when I was diagnosed as having this, went on the internet and looked up all the jokes I could find about Parkinson's, and some of them were very good indeed. You know, which would you rather have, Parkinson's or Alzheimer's? And the answer is Parkinson's, because I'd rather spill half my pint than forget completely where the hell I put it down. Told this one to the Lord Mayor in Belfast, and he immediately took out a pen and wrote it down. He said, I'll use that. I wrote a series of poems about it. The first poem is called Adjutans, because at one point, that was the name, I think. What was it? I know, sorry, I had a list somewhere, but it was one of the original names for this ailment. My left arm is jealous of my right, the one without a tremor. When right pours a glass of wine or throws a ball, left stifles a mild shiver of reproach. I call him adjutans and let him take charge of the big jug of water, so that the ice tumbles into the glasses like a subsiding cliff. He peaks in the football season when Arsenal play. If they get any better, I'll have to snuggle him tightly to my chest, straitjacket style. Meanwhile, his brother Wright is undeterred by his burgeoning duties, and once only, has released his own answering tremor, which of course is not such good news. Sometimes you write a poem, has a feel to it as though someone else had written it, as though it didn't belong to you. And I think most writers are very happy, to have this experience. I'm going to read a poem here called The Gate, and I don't know where it came from. I think it was something I saw many years ago, which a gate in the middle of a field, and this sort of stuck with me and eventually came out as this poem, The Gate. There's a gate in the middle of the field. It leads into the middle of the field and out of it. We lean on the gate in the hedge that leads into the field and stare at the gate in the middle. Travellers point to the gate in the middle of the field. They approach and investigate. You ain't heard nothing yet. They invest the gate with mysterious purpose. They want to interrogate whoever put it there. They admire a gate that has gate-crashed the middle of a field. Let all gates have such freedom, they think, bar none. We swing on the thought of a gate in the middle of a field where it has no business, long after the gate has gone. Remember that gate, we say, and at night in our dreams we head for the space in the middle. We pass and file through the space in the middle of the field and close, always reverently, the gate behind us. I'm still not sure who wrote that. I just want to boast about something for a minute. When the Penguin Book of Contemporary Irish Poetry was launched in Dublin, the two main readers were Seamus Heaney and Michael Longley, and they were given the task of reading a few of their own poems, and then they had to select one poem by somebody else and read that. And what do you think Heaney picked? The Gate! And afterwards Longley said to him, well, why did you pick that poem of Frank's? And Heaney reportedly said, oh, just because it was an example of Frank going buck mad.
Where Dickens walked, the meadows green, and Narnia woke beyond a dream. So write a verse and sing a song. You're welcome all, you're welcome all. And wandering bards still come to rest for peace and muse and hopefulness. Write a verse and sing a song. You're welcome all, you're welcome.